Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode 47, and today we're talking about streaming cameras everywhere and 0.91. As usual, I've got Phil joining me today. Hey, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And we've also got Jason joining us today. Hey, Jason.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. All right. This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabokasa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. The configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
So, Jason, you are responsible for TensorFlow and all these cool tweets we've been seeing from Paulus with live streaming. It's going to be very interesting chatting to you a bit later about everything you're using Home Assistant for.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, first of all, before we get into the 091 release, I think the past couple of weeks it's just been crazy with some things going on in the community, and we need to give a couple of shout-outs. First one is the VS Code extension for Home Assistant. So I know I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago when we were talking about the HAS CLI. I wanted like an extension for the Visual Studio Code. That is now being created, and it's available in the extensions marketplace. And yeah, it's awesome. So if you haven't already, do check it out. Even if you're not using Visual Studio Code, it might be a good reason to look into it. I use it daily when I'm coding, so if you don't use it already, it might be worth checking out. And going along with that, and this is how awesome Frank is as well, I think within a couple of days of the VS Code extension coming out, there is now a web version of the VS Code editor, and that is now an extension for HAS.io. And if you install that extension, it will install a web editor where you can use all the goodies of Visual Studio Code inside your browser. And it will also ship with the VS Code extension for Home Assistant pre-installed and pre-configured to talk to your HAS.io instance. So yeah, that's really cool. Thanks, Frank, for getting that out so quickly. And I think that extension is only available on the Intel NUC devices. It's not compatible if you're using a Raspberry Pi just because of the architecture that VS Code needs. But yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and you can actually install the extension, on VS Code on your computer as well. So if you use it locally, and Keys did an awesome job on that. We'd reached out a couple of times, asking, could someone build something like this for us? And Keys responded and took up the challenge. I think it was just a couple of days later that he launched it. So the autocomplete for entities is really cool.
Yeah, I think it's up to, last time I checked the version, like there's been 3 releases since then with people just suggesting features. And I think there is a GitHub repo if you've got any feature suggestions or you want to help out in the development there. We'll leave some links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and pseudo-related, not really related to VS Code, but in terms of just shout-outs to the community. Also, if you haven't seen it, if you haven't heard about it, the Home Assistant iOS app, we had Robbie on the show a while ago. Essentially, the 2.0 beta is out. It's coming. It's already here, available to the public. And as part of that, Robbie's also adding a tip jar, which links to essentially his Patreon and I believe Apple payment as well, if you choose to donate to the cause. So thanks a lot, Robbie. I mean, he spends a lot of time there's a lot of time that goes into building the iOS app. And the app itself is free as always, and tipping just goes towards Robbie. So he's again, like I said, he spends a lot of time. So thanks a lot, Robbie, and thanks to that team.
All right, so here it is, the next release, 091, and someone else we've had on the podcast, Otto Winter, who's done a lot of work with ESP Home. There is now a new ESP Home camera platform. And Jason, I'm sure this has got to somehow tie in with all the TensorFlow stuff and Stream stuff you've been working on as well. So it's cool to see another camera platform, and also this ESP Home library is just going it's so popular. So good to see some more stuff being added there.
Yeah, it's again, it's one of those things, right, where it's huge help for a lot of people that are getting into this and that want to build their own sensors and things like that. So
yeah, and it's really cool to see that, because again, ESP8266s are so cheap, and so it's a easy way to kind of have a DIY Wi-Fi enabled camera. That ESP8266s aren't powerful enough to provide a live stream, so I think it's just going to be image snapshots coming in through. But you can still process those image snapshots through, an image processing platform to do object detection and things like that if your Home Assistant installation is on a more powerful device. So it'll be cool to see.
Yeah. Also, if you use a Freebox router, there's a new switch in Home Assistant to turn on and off the Freebox router itself. So you can basically say, if nobody's home, from a security perspective, hey, you know what, turn off the Wi-Fi, right? That may or may not affect some other things. Again, if you have Wi-Fi devices, like let's say you have a Wemo or something like that, so you may want to use that with a bit of caution. But the option is there, should you so choose.
That's pretty cool from a security point of view, I guess.
Yeah.
It just sucks that there's so many IoT gadgets that do require Wi-Fi. But I guess, if you have no use for those devices while you're out of the house, then that's a good automation you can set up.
Well, exactly. I mean, if all of your automation is based on Zigbee, Z-Wave, or something else, then maybe this is a great option for you, right? There's I know just reading through forums and stuff, there's a lot of people out there that just use legacy wires and go with the wired setup. So great. In that case, then if you have a Freebox router, you can totally use this.
And another new platform is the TFIAC Climate Platform. So this is similar. I'm going to sort of put it in the same ballpark as the Tuya component. It's a white label app that you can install on your Android phone that enables you to control some compatible climate platforms. And I believe some brands that are available to be controlled by this app are TCL and Johnson, which I think might be in the UK. So if you're using the TFIAC app on your Android phone to control your climate, there is now a component in Home Assistant allowing you to get rid of the app and just control everything through Home Assistant.
Very cool. Also, so there's new switches added to support on the Daikin airbase zones. So essentially, if your ducted heating has a zone controller, you can now use Home Assistant to control those.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And in some other little updates around the place, the Great Migration has now been completed in Home Assistant. I know this was causing a lot of breaking changes for custom components over the past few releases, and I think Paul has mentioned it in the last episode when he was on. So basically, all the components from this release have now been moved over to the new file structure, and you'll now, if you are using custom components, you will need to make sure that they are in the same sort of file directory structure that if they overwrite any existing Home Assistant components, because they won't work in the next release of Home Assistant, I don't think. So make sure you rename those.
Yeah, I do love the fact that it's called the Great Migration.
Me too.
That's I just think that's really cool. Also, there's a new AWS component. So if there's different components and such for AWS today that are being merged into one single component. So that'll cover things like the Aws Notify Platform and so on. And essentially this piece will supersede all of those.
So I think there's going to be a breaking change, which we'll be talking about in a few episodes' time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And Netgear LTE routers can now accept incoming SMS messages, which is awesome. So if you've got a Netgear LTE router and you send it an SMS, an event will be fired in Home Assistant to say, hey, an SMS was received. And there's also a new service allowing you to delete the SMS messages that are stored on the router's inbox. So, you don't run out of memory there. So that's really cool. Can you imagine being able to, if you're out of away from home or something, just being able to SMS your house and say, hey, turn on the AC, I'm coming home.
Yeah.
So
that is kind of useful.
I guess a lot of people can do this with the bots or whatever that are out there, like Telegram bots. But I don't know, SMS is available everywhere. So, you don't need to install an app. You just SMS a phone number and there it is. You can have Home Assistant do something. Yeah,
it's universal. I a while ago I was working on a project where it was involving 4G and LTE, whatever. And as part of that, I actually made a script to reboot routers or get a status on if the router's up, down, whatever that is, just by texting a thing, right? So this is really cool now that I can start taking that and pushing that to Home Assistant and using that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So ironically, though, talking the very next item is talking about breaking changes, and the Netgear LTE component has actually been moved to its own component. So if you are using this and you do want to do all that cool stuff, you need to adjust your config files to use it for device tracking and things like that.
And I know one that's going to affect a lot of people, and it's going to affect me, just because how popular the Dark Sky weather platform is. But the Dark Sky now has support for hourly forecasts, which allow you to basically get, what's happening in the next 3 hours, or what's going to happen next hour, what's the temperature going to be. Because of this, if you're using daily forecasts, those entity IDs will now be changed to have a lowercase d on the end of the entity ID to denote that they are a daily forecast sensor. So if you are using the Dark Sky to get your daily forecast for the current day, or even the next few days, you will have to update your entity IDs in your config.
Yeah. Also, from a Z-Wave perspective, if you use a USB-based Z-Wave radio, then if you have a USB path set in your config, there'll be some things to watch out for. So essentially, if you have it set in your config.yaml file, that will actually be treated as the main USB path. And if you have anything else set in the configuration interface, the configuration file will override this. So just be aware of that. I'm sure this will affect quite a few people as well that use Z-Wave USB sticks. And
here's an interesting one for iOS users. And you sort of like, oh yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. So previously, the iOS component would mark a phone that isn't charging. It would be marked in Home Assistant as unplugged. And now, of course, this doesn't really make sense now that the iPhones have finally got wireless charging capability. Welcome to 2010, everyone. So from this release, when an iOS device isn't charging, Home Assistant will report its state as not charging, as opposed to unplugged. So if you are relying on that in some automations, you will need to just do a find replace on unplugged and just replace it with not charging.
Also, Yeelights have moved to their own platform, so it didn't make sense to add it to the standard light component, as they're doing some other stuff with that platform as well. So just to give you that capability, that has been moved to its own platform. So
yeah, I think Yeelights, which are from Xiaomi, they're pretty popular. So I think this one's going to be a pretty decent breaking change for everyone. The Gtfs Sensor, which we talked about in a couple of episodes ago, which is for public transport. Previously, those sensors would report the number of minutes until the next departure. However, if the next period is longer than a few hours, so let's say your next departure might not be for 12 hours, it doesn't really make sense to have that number of minutes displaying in your front end. So from now on, and from this release, the GTF sensor is going to be using a date-time object, which will allow things like the front end to display number of hours or number of minutes more nicely to the user. So if you're using those in templates or sensors, you will need to just either use templates to extract the date time and do your own sort of calculation on it. And just watch out for that.
Also, last one, Axis communication devices. So if you use any security devices from Axis, so like things like Axis cameras and so on, it's being moved away from the YAML files, and instead you would use the integrations panel in the UI to actually configure it. So there's a few other notes that come with this. We're not going to go into the details, so just have a look at the release notes for that and check it out in the break and change.
So Jason, here we go. It's like usually we have a guest on and they've done one sort of cool thing with Home Assistant and we just get to pick their brain about that. But you've actually done a couple of cool things. We've mentioned TensorFlow, and you've done the stream component. I just don't know where to begin. So tell us your story. What's made you do TensorFlow and what's made you do the stream components? Obviously you've got a use case for them. So what are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll kind of start at the beginning. I found Home Assistant, probably been a little over a year ago now. The first thing I did actually wasn't TensorFlow or the stream component. I was playing around a little bit with building a custom component around the Xbox. So being able to control my Xbox was the initial idea, and it was because I was laying in bed and I didn't want to reach over and grab the controller in order to do something, right? Yeah. So I was playing around with that a little bit, and kind of found a couple of things online, and then was like, all right, well, okay, I've got some cool little scripts in order to do this now, but how can I make this more useful so like my wife can do something with it as well? That's when I found Home Assistant and the media player component, and kind of built it in as a custom media player component. Well, it took me a long time to kind of build that out. And then as I was doing that, we moved into a new house, and I got on the home automation train, just even building something that wasn't, your standard home automation stuff. Usually people start with lights. I started with, how do I control my Xbox? So, when I bought my house, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go kind of to full bore when I bought the new house. I was like, I won't do it on the old house. I'll wait till we get the new one. So moved in, and I'd already done a whole bunch of research and decided to buy Z-Wave lights and stuff like this. But a lot of the justification for spending the time for my wife was home security. So she's been trying to get us to get a security alarm system from ADT or one of the other providers for quite some time. And I just told her that I can't justify a monthly monitoring fee when yeah, sure, we get a discount on insurance, but those things are crazy expensive. And I didn't want to have to spend all that kind of money on it. So I said, sure, what if I spend a couple $100s and put up cameras in our new house, and it'll alert us on our phones whenever something happens, right? And we can, kind of do a DIY solution versus, paying for monthly monitoring and exorbitant fees, because obviously the security companies like to sell you home automation stuff as well. But the prices are much higher. So that was kind of the initial justification. And then kind of when I started with, standard cameras, adding it to HA, I used Motion Eye in order to handle the recordings, and had the motion detection on the cameras send alerts on our iPhones. Well, that lasted about a week before I just got completely fed up with all of the false alarms.
Yeah.
A cloud cover, all of a sudden I get an alert on my phone. And, the tree blew in the wind, all of a sudden I get an alert on my phone. I got to a point where one day I was like, okay, I'm not going to clear any of these alerts, and I'm going to see how many I get a day. And there were over like 150 alerts on my phone. I was like, well, this isn't useful for security at all, because if I'm getting all of these alerts, then I'm just going to ignore them. Right. Same thing with my wife. So I was like, there has to be a better way, and all of, I looked at Blue Iris, I looked at a couple of the other popular, NVR platforms, and, none of them really had any really good smart alerting or smart motion detection built into them. And so I did a little bit more research, and I found, AWS Recognition, which, Robin has actually built a custom component using AWS Recognition, which is basically the TensorFlow component, but it runs in Amazon's cloud, and it's about 10 times faster because it runs in the cloud and doesn't, take up resources on your local machine. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to stick with something local, right? I didn't necessarily want to send my security footage up to the cloud in order to process these images. But I also didn't want to get alerted when a tree blew in the wind. So TensorFlow is a very popular machine learning library, developed by Google. And it's used for a heck of a lot more things than just object detection, but, they have open source object detection models available already. And so these models are trained off of an image data set that Microsoft has actually collected, and they can detect like 90 different items, to the point where it's like toothbrushes, chairs, potted plants, that kind of stuff. But the more important ones, the ones that I cared about, was person, car, truck, bicycle, right? Yeah. I wanted to see, what would happen. And so I kind of started working on that and building it into Home Assistant, and, it worked a heck of a lot better than, I thought that it would initially, and decided that I wanted to contribute that back to the Home Assistant core. So that was really my first core contribution was that TensorFlow object detection library. And, now I get zero false alarms. So I still have the alerts, and I use Robbie's awesome iOS app in order to get those push notifications sent to me with the actionable notifications, so that, if I get something and I see it and I'm like, hey, this person's not right, I can use text to speech or something in order to, when I push a button on the notification, my house says, intruder detected, get out of here, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the initial, the initial piece of it. But I still had Motion Eye kind of running in the background, because Home Assistant doesn't have any recordings. I was getting a snapshot image, right? An image taken or a picture taken of that thing, and that picture was being sent to me. I tried to initially send the live feed over the stream, but by the time I got the notification, the person or the thing was already gone, right? And so, with TensorFlow, I was able to send the picture of what it actually detected, and that was okay. But I was still using Motion Eye in order to actually do the recordings, right? In order to take clips. But, all of a sudden my hard drive was starting to fill up because Motion Eye was still recording everything, trees blowing, cloud coverage, etc. And so I didn't really have any video recordings. I would have to look at the timestamp of the snapshots that were taken and try and match them up with the recordings. And so that's when I came up with the crazy idea, and it absolutely was crazy because it took me a couple of months of research and building in order to get Stream to where it is today. But, the idea of, hey, can we have live streams in Home Assistant? And Paulus, kind of held my hand through a lot of it. So I appreciate, all of the dedication that he has to helping me make it a reality. But, I have all these grand ideas of where I want it to go and what I want it to be. And, he's hammering in MVP in my head the entire time. Yeah, so we initially launched it and, it was just HLS only, which is HTTP live streaming. It's an Apple format, which is good because it's supported by Chromecast as well. And it's also supported by all of the major web browsers so that you can get live streams with a little bit of a delay in your, in your front end as well. But this release is really what I was shooting for, and that's the new recording service that's going to come out with 0.91. So, cameras already had a snapshot service that you could call in an automation in order to, one of your motion sensors goes off and you can trigger a snapshot on the camera. Well, again, I already had snapshots with TensorFlow, and, that wasn't really enough for me. So I built the record service, and that was one of my main goals all along was if my camera, I use Hikvision cameras, and there's the Hikvision component that ties into the camera's motion detection. So if I get a motion detection event from my camera, and then I run that through TensorFlow in order to say, hey, is this motion detection event real or not, right? Is there a person or a car or something that I care about in the image? And then that says, yeah, actually there is a person in here. Now I can just say, okay, camera.record, and then it'll record a 30-second clip, and I'll have an actual video feed of that event happening. And one of the cool things is since it uses the same thing that the live stream component does, we save actually 10 to 15 seconds of previous video kind of in memory on your Home Assistant device as well. So there's an option on this new record service for look back. So TensorFlow takes about a second or so, depending on your hardware. On a Raspberry Pi, it takes a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
And it takes a little bit of time in order to take that image snapshot and process it and try and figure out, is there a person or not in this recording? And the motion detection, it might come a little late. It might, trigger as the person's walking out of the frame, right? But since we have 10 to 15 seconds of live video in the backlog, you can say, camera.record for 30-second duration and look back 10 seconds. And that means that you'll have a 40-second clip of 10 seconds before you called the record service and 30 seconds after.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty handy, actually.
Yeah.
I know I've got a Ring doorbell, and sometimes you'll get a motion alert, and, it's just the person walking out of the frame sort of thing. So I can definitely see that being useful.
Yep, that's exactly what we're trying to prevent is hey, you get an alert of someone walking away, right? So with the look back, you get to kind of prepend them walking up as well. So
yeah, and you're saying it's only a couple of seconds of delay between to actually do the lookup and to trigger the record. So you detect a motion, that image or stream gets passed to TensorFlow, and then TensorFlow does its thing and goes, yes, human, and then passes on the triggers a record. So you're saying that only takes a couple of seconds?
Yeah, I'm using an i5 NUC, NUC i5 8 for running Home Assistant, and then I'm not using the mobile TensorFlow model. I'm using one of the more accurate ones, right? So image processing, image detection, there's a trade-off between accuracy and speed. Mm-hmm. And that's the main thing. Obviously, if you want it to be more accurate, it's going to take a lot longer to have it figure out, is this real or not?
Absolutely.
And so it takes an average of 1 to 1.5 seconds on my machine from the point that I call image processing.scan on the camera until TensorFlow comes back with a result that says, yeah, there's 2 people and 3 cars in this picture.
So you're running this through your NUC, is there a correlation with the number of cameras you have connected to how much resources that will consume? So if I've got 10 cameras around my house all streaming through Home Assistant to do this detection of people, is that going to have more of an effect than if I just had one camera?
It depends on how it's configured. First off, I would recommend not to try and do any TensorFlow object detection on a Raspberry Pi. While it's technically possible, the results aren't going to be great.
Yeah.
Especially if you have anything else running. If you're running, virtual environment. Unfortunately, with TensorFlow, it's also very difficult to install. All of these machine learning libraries are very system specific. So unfortunately, we weren't really able to release an add-on for HAS.io and for TensorFlow. So it's really if you're running it in a V environment or the official Docker image. I do have a custom, because I am running HAS.io on my NUC as well, and I have a AMD 64 image, just a custom add-on that installs TensorFlow on HAS.io, but it's not available on the Raspberry Pi, and I probably wouldn't recommend trying to run it on a Raspberry Pi if you're wanting to do image processing. An old laptop will probably work just fine. It don't have to be a super crazy expensive system, but
yeah, well, it does. This kind of stuff does take quite a bit of cycles, right? So
yep. If I look at the resource usage on my NUC when it's actually trying to scan an image, it pegs the CPU for that entire second and a half that it's trying to figure it out. So it's resource intensive, and so the recommendation is set the scan interval, the default scan interval of the component to something crazy like 10,000 seconds. So it'll actually only run the scan once every 10,000 seconds, but then use your other motion detection binary sensors. So if you have a motion detector, or if you have your camera reporting the motion events, use that to trigger the image processing.scan service.
Right.
And so that way you're only using those resources when you need to. The cool thing about the stream component too is you'd think that the live stream component would be pretty resource intensive as well. But I had someone in the beta channel, Daniel Shikui is his name, or D Shikui on Discord, was actually testing out. He had 8 cameras running on a Raspberry Pi 3B using the stream component, and it was only using 50% CPU.
That's not bad.
Yeah. So one of the main things that I was trying to do with stream is obviously make it accessible to all Home Assistant users. So while you need a much more powerful machine in order to run the image processing piece of my setup, getting live streams, you should be able to do that no problem with with HAS.io on a Raspberry Pi. And the way that we built it as well is the streams are requested on demand. So by default, it's not trying to read your camera stream every time as soon as you boot up Home Assistant. It's only when you call the play stream service or the record service or open up the more info dialog of your camera in the front end that it actually goes to request that stream.
Right. So by default, it's not playing like you open a YouTube video and it just starts playing kind of thing, right? It's paused or it's screenshot until you trigger it.
Yep, exactly. Which, unfortunately, and this is, I kind of hinted at the look back piece as a part of the record service. Unless you have an active stream going, you obviously won't have the ability to use that look back,
right.
Which is why in 0.91 as well, for those of us who do have more powerful machines that are running this, and again, it's not really resource intensive at all. You can do this on a Raspberry Pi, but I'd say, do this at your own risk. But there's going to be a new preload stream option in 0.91 as well. So what that's going to be is if you go into the front end and you click on the stream and open it up, there'll be a new checkbox. It's probably going to be on the top right of the stream. And if you check that, whenever you restart Home Assistant or open the stream again, it's going to keep that stream alive. And so that means that right now there's a timeout. You open it up and it runs for 5 minutes, and it's like, hey, if I haven't been used in 5 minutes, go ahead and shut this down so that I don't use any more resources. But with the preload stream, it makes it much faster to load as well. So you'll probably notice in 0.90, if you've loaded the stream, whenever you click on the image and it pulls up in the camera, it could take, 5, 6, maybe even 10 seconds to load, depending on your camera. The preload stream will make that pop up instantly. And then same thing if you're trying to cast it to a Chromecast device, it'll load on that Chromecast device a lot faster as well, because we'll have kind of pre-buffered that video in Home Assistant as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm guessing then this is only going to be available for certain types of cameras. So I mentioned before I've got a Ring camera, a Ring doorbell. I'm guessing I'm not going to be able to use this component to be able to access that stream.
Yeah, so with the types of cameras, initially in 0.90 we released it, and it supported the generic IP camera as well as the Amcrest component. In this release, we're going to be adding more platforms, and actually we're still looking at all of the camera platforms to see which platforms actually do provide a live stream. So the Ring doorbell is one that unfortunately doesn't expose a live stream through their API. So
right.
It only gives you the ability to look at, past recording clips or past recorded clips. And in Home Assistant, that's what it shows. It shows, the latest clip that was recorded on the Ring doorbell. Unfortunately, the same thing with, I have a Nest Hello doorbell. And right now, the official Nest API doesn't provide a live stream either. It only gives you the ability to take a snapshot once every or twice every minute or something like that.
Right.
Unless you sign up for Nest Aware. So there's going to definitely be some cameras that aren't supported, but any camera that has a RTSP URL, real-time streaming protocol is what it stands for, in case you were wondering. Or even, a SRTP, or I don't know, any of the real-time protocols. So like Blue Iris, for example, if you have any cameras in Blue Iris actually provides a live feed as well in HLS format. So Home Assistant is streaming HLS format to the front end, but you can also use Blue Iris as an input to Home Assistant. And I can probably send you guys a link to put in the show notes, but there's actually a post on the community forum right now under the configuration section that is kind of confirmed working configurations among many different cameras.
Oh, that would be handy.
Yeah, please, we can add that.
So how was working with Paulus when developing this component? I know you mentioned before you had a lot of back and forwards about MVP.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Paulus is a great person to work with. Really, I'm an experienced engineer, and but I'm not experienced in the Home Assistant code base. So that's really what it boils down to is, I bounce an idea off of Paulus of, hey, how would I do this in Home Assistant, right? And it's the in Home Assistant part that he was actually really able to help with. It's good to have someone knowledgeable and especially available in order to be able to answer those kinds of questions. Because the last thing that I wanted to do, the pull request on Stream had 184 comments, I think, before it was time to be merged.
Wow. And
there's only 184 comments on the pull request. In Discord, there was like 1,000 questions and 1,000 comments. And so I definitely knew that it was something that I wanted to reach out to, to the core team before trying to contribute back, because it's definitely a big pull request. There's a lot of work that went into it, and it can be overwhelming to look at, 1,000 lines of code and try and figure out what does this do, and especially time consuming. I spent, about a month or so on it, and Paul has probably spent a good week, just answering questions or giving me feedback and helping me iterate so that it'd actually make it through. I actually looked back, and all of the contributions I've made to Home Assistant, Paulus has actually been the one that have merged in, which is a little bit concerning. Because, we've got a lot of people that are contributing, and Paulus does a great job keeping up and kind of even mentoring some of the, to get some of the things that he likes to see kind of pushed through and across the finish line.
Mm-hmm. So how long have you been playing with things like TensorFlow and all of these pieces here? Like, is that something that you picked up just for this, or
100% picked up just for this, which is, again, my wife has been extremely patient, overly patient with me because it's been a lot of nights and weekends of, figuring out, how audio and video streams work. And I know a lot more about AV streams than I ever did before. And I really, really don't care to have that knowledge. Same thing with TensorFlow and object detection. I've never done anything with machine learning before kind of working on that. So it was definitely a learn as I go.
So you've got all this machine learning now, and I'm just imagining like your house is like unbreakable in, like you would just be future, like the future is your house right now with all these spying cameras. What are you using like these cameras for? Do you have like, as soon as you walk up, the house will recognize who you are and give you a nice greeting, or does it know to make you a coffee in the morning when you're looking sleepy? Have you gone to that level?
No. So probably like almost every developer who contributes to Home Assistant, I'm sure that there are plenty of people in the community who have a lot more elaborate setups than I do. And it's because I've been spending a lot of my time actually working on new features versus actually automating my own house. So my Home Assistant setup, the Amazon devices throughout my house, and use those for controlling some things by voice, but I actually hate controlling things by voice. I actually had the competitor product that starts with the G for a little while, and I actually stuck with the Amazon devices because you can put them in brief mode. Because one of the things I hated most was saying, hey, do something, and then it says, okay, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And so with the Amazon devices, I'm able to say, hey, do something, and it just goes bing, which is a little bit better.
Yeah, I like beforehand, and even though like that's brief mode on the Amazon Echo, before that it was just like all she would say was okay. Like, so they've made it even briefer compared to obviously the Google Home.
Right. So, I do some things, and then I use the iOS app, obviously a lot. And, again, it's really only if there's something out of reach. I've always got my phone on me. And so I've gotten lazier. I've got Z-Wave switches all over my house. And so as I'm going to bed at night, I won't bother walking around the house and turning off the lights. I'll just go upstairs, get in bed, open the app, and hit the toggle to turn all the lights off. But that's really, like, my automations are really sad. I haven't exposed my Home Assistant config yet, but I can. Really, my automations are the hallway in my garage is dark, even in the day. I don't have any windows in that hallway. So I've got a sensor I'm using connected to hook up the wired sensors that are in my doors. And so when I open the garage door, it turns on the hallway light. And when I shut the garage door, after 45 seconds, it turns the light back off. And then that's the only automation I have around lights.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's sometimes simple is good, right? I mean, it's funny because even hosting the podcast, like there's a lot of people that are like, oh man, like what kind of stuff do? You must do some crazy stuff. No, I mean, I have a couple of automations with lights. I've got like that kind of stuff too, right? It has to be usable. So
exactly. So the majority of my automations are really around what I mentioned earlier is sending notifications to my phone and my wife's phone if motion is detected. And it's only, so I do have presence detection kind of set up. So it'll only alert us if neither of us are home, right? And so basically it's, okay, motion detected from one of the cameras, run it through TensorFlow. Okay, TensorFlow says there's a person in the backyard, or there's a car in the driveway, or there's a person in your foyer, or whatever, in the different cameras that I have set up around the house. And then it'll say, okay, iOS.notify, and then send that picture that TensorFlow comes back with to our phones.
And so I'm guessing that picture will only come back to you if no one of you, like if no one's home, like because.
Correct. Yeah. So I do have, well, on some of the cameras. So the inside cameras, obviously, we don't get notifications if people are home.
Yeah, right.
I do still have notifications set up for our driveway and our backyard cameras. So that way I get. At one point in time, I have the custom Alexa component set up as well. So
I don't know how to set to that setting.
Oh man, see there?
So that was karma.
That's right.
There's karma for you. I have that custom component set up. It's has a Notify platform for that as well. So I did at one point have it set up where if we were home and there was a car detected in the driveway, then she would say, "You have a visitor in the driveway," and kind of let us know about that. And then my wife would give me a sideways glance every time she did that. So I turned that automation off.
Have you considered using anything like OpenAlper or something like that to recognize the license plate and then say, okay, based on ABC 123, okay, that's my car, and AAA 123 is my wife's car, so don't bother.
Yep. So I live in the lovely state of North Carolina, and in the state of North Carolina, we don't have front license plates. So unless I was backing up my driveway, which I don't do very often, then that wouldn't be very helpful.
Right.
And then at the same time, just the location of my camera, it's about 8 feet in the air looking down, and so not very good for being able to to
pull
read
up plate.
the license plates.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that at one point in time. I was like, well, do I install a small camera near my mailbox at the right level for license plates that as people are driving up, it's pointing back up toward my house so I can capture the license plate. But I never got around to it, and I probably won't.
Yeah, fair enough.
So is there like the capability either in TensorFlow or anything for it to learn what your car specifically looks like? So, your particular make and model of car and color, would it then be able to recognize that as your car?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. The unfortunate reality, though, is that it's probably more complicated than even I am willing to dedicate time trying to learn.
Yeah.
Training object detection and image classification models for AI is complicated. We'll just leave it at that. There's hundreds of thousands of images that are used in order to train these object detection models, and I'm more than happy to use the hundreds of thousands of hours that that Google has put into it and just be able to download something and use that. So the real answer is yes, it's possible to train your own image detection, image classification, object detection models if you're willing to take 600 pictures of your car and then manually go through those images and annotate them with here's where in the image my car is, and then run a program on your computer for 8 hours overnight in order to train the model, and then test it out to find out that okay, well, it works 20% of the time.
yeah, fair.
But I mean, really, the standard models that are there are pretty darn good. They're just not your specific car or your specific face.
Yeah, no, that's man, it's super complicated, but it's very cool. I know, like I've looked into TensorFlow and stuff a little bit in the past. Like I will not even remotely say I understand a lot of the stuff. High level, I get it, but good for you for jumping into that with jumping in both feet in, just completely blind and
yeah. So I mean, with that, it's not wrong to say that Home Assistant is on the bleeding edge of these kind of things, with having the ability to have that kind of stuff built into it.
Yeah.
And, anything with computing, what's hard now will be, anybody can do in 5 years. So I'd imagine that things like that are going to be coming a long way in the next couple of years, especially as, I don't think that we're more than 5 years off of self-driving cars, right? So as things like that start to come along and technology starts to evolve, right now it's, more for researchers at universities and PhDs. But, in 5-10 years, I wouldn't be surprised if, it's available for the masses.
Sure. Yeah, that would actually be really cool to see, just in terms of, all the stuff that goes into it. And
also scary.
For sure. I mean, I've seen some machine learning demos and stuff that are, they are pretty crazy. And it's like, and I was actually talking to a professor, I guess earlier this week, and we were chatting about, how far is too far, right? And even with AI and machine learning, and how far will you go until it's too big brother, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think those are all questions that we'll have to answer. I think though that again we're a long time off from having to worry way too much about it.
Yeah.
So in terms of TensorFlow, can that be run against a saved video that's come through?
But not in Home Assistant.
Okay.
So Home Assistant, really the way that the image processing platform works is you have a camera entity.
Yeah.
So what you could potentially do is you could use the local file camera. And so if you had something that, kind of looked at a recorded video and saved pictures from that video, then you could run those pictures through TensorFlow or, outside of Home Assistant. You can take a video and run that through.
Because I have the Ring video camera, which when it detects motion, as you've mentioned before, the trees flapping around, it'll send an alert to all our phones. There's motion at your front door, and I've actually got it hooked up to Home Assistant so that whenever a new video is added to Ring, it'll just pull in that video down and save it locally. So it would be cool if I could somehow grab that video that's just been saved and then run it through a TensorFlow to see, all right, was there actually a person in that video? If so, then maybe send a higher priority alert so that, we can avoid these false positives all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, not at this time. Anything's possible though. If someone decides, that's a cool idea and I want to spend a lot of my time doing it.
Yeah, that's fair. So tell us some stuff about your own setup. So I know you said it's kind of minimal. I mean, in terms of automation and stuff, but like what components do you have in your setup? So I know you mentioned some Z-Wave switches, I think.
Yep. So I've got one of the Home Seer wall dimmers in the living room for my fan, and decided that I didn't want to spend $50 per switch, so didn't buy any more of those.
Fair.
It's wonderful and it's cool that you can change the colors and have specific alerts on the switch. So the LEDs, you can change individually. So if someone leaves the garage door open, I can change the third LED up to red, right?
Oh wow! And
I can have automations around that, which is it's actually really cool. I just haven't done it.
Fair.
So I've got some of the Innovelli switches, mostly everywhere else. The scene control switches, which at one point in time I had, double tap up, turned on everything in the living room for me, or, double tap down on any of the switches turns off all the lights in the house.
Right.
And then I have some of the new Zeus switches, which allow for 4-way configurations out of the box, which, all of the other switches, you would have to buy companion switches in order to do 3-way, 4-way setups. So I bought the Innovellis because they had three-way switches, three-way setups that worked. So you can have a dumb switch in all of the other sockets. But, in my staircase, I have a switch at the bottom, and then a switch in the middle, and then a switch at the top, and then the light, right? So that's what it's called a four-way setup. So there's a Z-Wave switch that allows for four-way setup that way as well. So I've got a couple of those. And then, I've got the connected security component set up. I just bought an ESP8266 and flashed their firmware on it. I didn't, buy the kit from their website. The firmware is open source as well, so you can use that. Pretty cool. I only have the house that I have, or that I bought, has hardwired sensors for all of the doors. So I've got that to kind of monitor that door sensor, so I don't have to have like a Z-Wave door sensor on the doors. And it's kind of built into the door, so you can't see it or anything. So that's pretty cool. And then for media players, again, I've got my custom Xbox component that I'm running in order to be able to. I use my Xboxes as my media center, so the cable box and the TV are plugged in through the Xbox, and so when I turn on the Xbox, it automatically turns on my sound bar, my TV, and my my TV receiver and all of that. And Xbox has that out of the bat, but I had no way to turn on my Xbox remotely without reaching for a controller. So, I turn on my Xbox and Home Assistant, and then the Xbox turns on everything else for me. So I've got that, and then a couple of cameras and a Nest Hello doorbell, which, again, it's a Nest doorbell, so unfortunately I don't get the live feed from it. I'll have to find a way around that. And that's really it. That's everything that's in my house. Nothing too crazy.
Very cool.
And so, with all your current automations that you're running, what would have to be your favorite one?
So my favorite automation is probably the one I have for my cameras, when I'm not home. And so, as I described before, really it's using the Hikvision binary sensor components built in, because I have Hikvision cameras outside. And so when it detects motion, it'll trigger a TensorFlow or an image processing scan on that snapshot. And then as it does that, if TensorFlow detects something, it'll send an alert to my phones. And really, it's really the if that's in there as well. It's I've got some template conditions in here. It's like, hey, if I'm home, then don't worry about the inside cameras. Only send me notifications for the outside cameras. And so really the reason I'm proud of it is because it's basically a single automation that handles all of the conditions. So I kind of was able to condense it down instead of having, 16 different automations for all of the different types of things I wanted to handle. Just using a lot of the template stuff in there to say, do this if we're not home, or if it's not this camera, and, replacing the text in the notification that I get to include like driveway motion detected or backyard motion detected, by kind of splitting the entity ID up to pull that in.
Nice one.
And then I had to put the text-to-speech notification behind an input Boolean, since my wife didn't like it happening all the time.
Well, that's the thing. I guess text-to-speech can be very jarring, especially if you're watching TV or something, and then all of a sudden there's an announcement in the middle of dialogue, or if it just gets too noisy.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you want to make sure, like you said, it is it is at appropriate times or what have you, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I think the thing that put the nail in the text-to-speech coffin was when she decided that it was good to. It thought that a cat in our driveway was a person at 3 a.m.
Oh, yeah, I can see that not working well.
Yeah, so it would have been good though if it was actually a person, because it woke us up. So
I guess that's a good way to test it.
Yeah, unfortunately, when it thinks a cat is a person, then it's not as helpful.
Yeah.
So on that, how many false positives are you seeing with your camera setup?
So that was very early on. In the TensorFlow configuration, you can set a confidence level. Mm-hmm. And so I was in the process of tweaking that. I've got it fine-tuned right now to the point where I don't get any false positives. And I've only had like 1 or 2 misses in the month or so that it's been running like that.
Wow.
And so for me, 90% was the magic number. You have to be 90% confident before alerting me of something. And, it's because the camera in my backyard thought that, it was 85% sure that my grill was a car, right? Well, no, my grill is not a car.
And so on the other side, do you have the ability to review to make sure that those thresholds are correct? What if someone's sneaking in at 88%? How would you determine that your settings are correct?
So really, it's just a matter of I have them set that way, and then I walk around in my daily routines. Not just, of course, I walk around to test that I'm still getting alerts and everything. But as time goes by, I'll take a look at the notifications on my phone, and I'll be like, okay, well, did it alert me when my wife left this morning? Did it alert me, for some reason, my father-in-law picks my daughter up from school some days of the week, and instead of coming in through the garage, he likes to come in through the backyard, which, okay, fine. I've got a camera back there, and so I check it, and I say, okay, my father-in-law is picking my daughter up from school. Let's make sure that, at 4:15, or around about, I check my phone and see, did I get an alert saying that, there's people in the backyard? And so, up to this point, it's really only been us, my family that's been alerted. And then, delivery guys, it's nice to know when, I have a package ordered on Amazon and it comes in the middle of the day. Because I can see the delivery person walking up the driveway. But yeah, that's really how I tweaked the confidence level is, I set it to something and then I let it run for a week and I say, what did I miss? And if I miss something, then I'd lower it a little bit. And then I'd say, well, how many false positives am I getting? And just kind of tweaking that value as it comes along. And it's going to be different for every person and every camera as well, because it depends on, where your camera is positioned and what the resolution of your camera is and things like that as well. So.
Right. And
have you dressed up as a robber? Maybe put like a black hoodie on and, some dark clothes to try and make sure that that's working?
I have not, but my dog has set it off once or twice. I've got a 60-pound boxer mix, and we let her outside to go to the bathroom. Sometimes if we're not fast enough to open the door back up again, she'll jump up onto the door. And so when she jumps up onto the door, she's skinny and tall, and camera says, "Ooh, that's a person." I guess that's
that's one way to get your attention, that she wants to come in.
Yeah.
No, haven't decided to try and dress up as a robber or anything. I did, when I initially built it, I recruited my 5-year-old to stand in different various positions, half hidden and half visible, and crouched down and hiding behind a tree kind of things, just to see what it would pick up and what it wouldn't. So she had fun.
I'm sure she did. That's man, as a 30-year-old, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. I have to check out all these new stream components, and maybe I'll have to buy some cameras just to play with them.
That's it.
You can get them cheap nowadays.
Yeah, can you? So, all right. So you're using the Hikvision ones, right?
Yes.
So how do you power those?
Power over Ethernet is how I have mine set up. So I've got a Unify set up at home.
Yep. And do they have their own sort of base that they need to communicate with, or are they just communicate directly over the internet? Like you can get the stream from them directly from their IP address.
Yep, you get the stream directly from the IP address. So they're just IP cameras that are set up. I don't have a specific NVR setup or network video recorder.
I know. I see every time I see in Reddit, there's always someone asking, what is a recommended, camera to go for, and so yeah, these sound more like probably a decent one to go for, I think.
Yeah, they're not bad at all. I think I got them for like $100 a piece, so definitely not cheap. And then you also have to have the equipment to power them, obviously, but. And the networking equipment isn't necessarily cheap either. But even like even some of like the Wise cameras that you can flash Tahua firmware on, right? You can get indoor cameras for, $30, $40, $50 that'll still give you a live feed stream that you can connect to directly from their IP address. So the ones I have are probably, they're definitely not high end, but kind of mid range. But if you want to play around with the stream component, really the thing that you have to look for is, does this camera support, getting a live feed directly from the camera? If the answer is yes to that, then you can pick something up in the $50 to $60, $40 to $60 range, or US dollar range anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's decent priced.
All right, well, Jason, thank you so much for all your work on TensorFlow and all your contributions to Home Assistant. We will leave links to all those components and anything else that we've forgotten to mention today. So thank you for taking the time.
Amazing. This is a lot of fun. This is something that, at least for me, is really interesting. So thank you for all your effort that you've put in.
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Pleasure. Cheers.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.